everyone. My name is JoAnn Yao. I'm the social media manager and video producer for We Need Diverse Books. Welcome to the virtual launch for Marieke Nijkamp's new book. We are so honored to be able to host this today and host Marieke in conversation. For everyone who doesn't know, Even If We Break is a book from Marieke Nijkamp. It comes out today. It is a shocking new thriller about a group of friends who go to a cabin to play a murder mystery game, only to have the game turned against them. It is on sale wherever books are sold. We have a bookshop link in the description below. Check it out, especially if you love thrillers and everything that's been discussed. If you have any questions for Marieke, feel free to leave them in the comments below during the video. She will be around to answer them for you. So today we have Marieke, who is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of This Is Where It Ends and Before I Let Go. She is a storyteller, dreamer, globetrotter, geek, and she holds degrees in philosophy, history, and medieval studies, and has served as an executive member of We Need Diverse Books. And she is also the founder of Diversify YA. And in conversation with her, we have our communications manager, Alaina Lavoie. She is a reviewer for Booklist. She teaches in the Writing, Literature, and Publishing department at Emerson College. In 2017, she was awarded a Book Builders of Boston Scholarship for her dedication to amplifying marginalized voices. She lives in Boston with her wife and their 2 literary cats, which I love. And so, without further ado, I will throw the conversation over to Alaina and Marieke.
Thank you so much for being here with us. I had a chance to read Even If We Break over the summer, and I'm very glad that I did. Now that it's fall, I feel like it would hit a little closer to home with that Halloween feeling creeping around the corner. So thank you for being here, and I'm excited to get started if you're ready to get started as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's dive in. You have 5 really dynamic and very different from one another characters who all have point of view chapters: Liva, Carter, Finn, Maddie, and Ever. Did any of these characters kind of come to you first, or did you develop them all around the same time? And were any of them born out of the desire to do something kind of surprising for a thriller, like a twist on a usual trope or something similar to that?
I think Ever probably came to me first because, like Ever, I'm a game master when I play. Most of the time I do actually play too, but most of the time I'm game master, dungeon master. So they're like excitement about storytelling, about games and all of that. That was definitely something I connected to and just felt like a very natural start for a book about RPGs. Like, start with a game master and build out the party around them. So yeah, I think Ever came to me first, but all of them happened happened pretty much at the same time. I mainly just wanted to write a thriller with characters that I'd never seen in a thriller before. So trans and non-binary characters, disabled characters, autistic characters, basically all pieces of me that I've been longing to see in books and thankfully have been seeing more, but never quite in this combination. So I basically started with what if RPGs and what if me in RPGs and went from there.
I love that. And thinking a little bit more about tropes and the tropes that show up in a lot of thrillers and mystery books and similar genres, do you have any favorites or tropes or setups for thrillers that tend to really catch your attention? When you hear about it, you think, I have to read or watch this? And are there any that you absolutely avoid?
I'm not very good with like slasher horror, blood and gore personally, because believe it or not, I love writing thrillers and I love writing horror. I'm a scaredy cat, so I actually struggle a lot with reading and watching them after nighttime. I tend to read my thrillers like during the day when it's light out, when it's sunny, and it's not as scary as it could be. because I'm definitely that person whose imagination just runs rampant and who will see shadows around every corner once I've read a thriller. So I tend to shy away from like the slasher horror type stuff. I do love cabin in the woods type stories, which should not come as a surprise to anyone who reads this book because it's set in the cabin in the woods. But also I really love the idea of enclosed stories, of just focusing on the space around the characters as much as the characters themselves, and seeing what happens when they're locked in, when they have nowhere to go, when they're basically just like have to rely on themselves and figure out how to go from there. So yeah, I love settings like that. I love creepy settings. I love books set in graveyards and cemeteries as well. Just, I'm a big fan of settings, is the thing. I love it when setting feels like its own character.
You did a really excellent job with that, and even if we break, I really felt like the setting came alive in the book, and I know that if I were going to a cabin at some point this fall and I took the book with me and read it there for the first time, I would probably not be able to finish it. Thankfully, I finished it in a much calmer place, but the real life setting of Liva's cabin and Lonely Peak, and then there's also the role-playing setting that the characters are, role-playing in together. I'm curious which one you created first, or if you drew those worlds out together to kind of complement one another. And through your writing process, did you have to change anything about either of those settings to fit the plot?
Mostly the latter. Mostly I wrote them together and just figured out like this is this group of teens who comes from this suburban town in Arizona and want to play a role-playing game together. What would the world look like that they're building together, that they're discovering together? What are things that Ever, as the game master, would be interested in? And I basically took that as a sort of basis for building out the world and building out all these adventures that they're going on. And there are definitely some references or like nods to their real life, but mostly it's also a very like traditional fantasy setting, like this sense of this is the type of world you build the first time you, at least in my experience and the experience of many games I've played, like the first time you properly build your own world for an RPG, it's going to deal with fantasy tropes. It's going to have probably this type of medieval European feel to it. And that's definitely the case here too, but with a lot of Ever's own awareness of the world and the world they live in, the world they see, and tweaks and just ways to make it more inclusive and more reflective of the world they live in. So it's basically very much informed by their own experiences, but also on the like, I'd say on the border between traditional fantasy worlds and creator who knows what they're doing and has the experience and the wherewithal to make it truly their own. And it's never entirely meant to be original or authentic like that, because they're just having fun playing in this world too and finding their own ways and creating their own stories. In the end, that's far more what it's about for the five of them than actually making sure that the world is as unique as it can be. It's about the stories they create together, the games they play together, the memories they make. So I wanted to not draw too much attention away from that.
I really felt that when I was reading it too, that feeling that for each of these characters there was a reason why they were so drawn to role playing, and they're all there for different reasons. They all have very different lives, and one of the things that I loved is the way that you incorporated that. You're each of your 5 characters has a really well-developed alter ego in this fantasy role-playing world. They all have strengths and weaknesses, and they're all coming together mostly to solve murder mysteries, which I thought was really cool, that in this fantasy setting they're used to doing this, and then they actually get put in a similar situation. And I'm curious, you know, to what degree did you want to tie those things into the way the characters react in real life? And what do their alter egos say about who they are in real life and who they wish that they could be, and what it means to have who you want to be differ from who you actually are?
Well, to start with, the murder mystery was just mine not being subtle at all. It's like you said, I wanted to have that sort of mirror there between the murder mysteries they solve in the game and then everything happening around them, and sort of taking everything they experience in the game and everything they kind of maybe learn there, maybe not, and take it to their own means of survival. And that was not intended to be subtle, so I'm glad it isn't. But it was intended to be a sort of reflection on the fact that role-playing isn't just a game for so many of us. It isn't for these characters. It's never quite been for me. It hasn't been for many of the friends I've played with. It's a way to explore who you can be. It's a way to try on different versions of yourself, or different characters entirely. And it's still a way of learning about what you can do, learning about the world, learning about elements of yourself maybe that you didn't thought were there. To give an example, like I said, I love dungeon mastering, I love game mastering, and I never really considered myself as someone who improvises easily or well. And it's something you have to do when playing a game. There's only so much you can prepare. Your players will inevitably go in the only direction you've never thought of, because that's what players do. And you have to improvise, and you have to figure out what happens, and you have to build in ways for yourself to deal with that. And just like exploring that through gaming definitely taught me something about how I approach public speaking situations in real life now, for example. So there's definitely elements of things you can try on and learn in the game that you can take away to the real world. And that's definitely the case here too, with these murder mysteries and suddenly actual disappearances and murders. So I think in that sense, it's a bit of a commentary on like gaming and how it's the best thing ever, basically. But it's also, like you said, all these characters have different reasons to be in the game. And I think that I just blatantly stole from many of the people I've gamed with, who would approach gaming, role-playing in like a very low-key, fun, let's do something tonight way, or very invested in terms of just like having character art and entire backstories and everything in between. And they all would have different reasons to be in that game and to explore certain characters. And that's one of the things that always appealed to me. So I wanted to make sure that that's true for these characters as well. So you have Lavoie, for example, who wants to has like family expectations she deals with. She's basically the it girl. She has a lot of things in the real world that she's very comfortable with, but also a place where she's also still very much trying to find herself. And the game allows her to be a completely different character with like a pirate background, and a character who tries to figure out how to deal with, like, this is a completely different world. I wouldn't communicate with people around me like this in real life, but let me try being like this today. Let me try being like that today, just as ways to figure out who she can be. And there are people like Maddie, who's been in a car accident, and she has a chronic knee injury now, which basically means she has to give up her sports career, and she has a character that she can just escape to, because in this world where they're playing, she's still the exact same person she was before the accident, and in real life she measures everything as before the accident and after the accident. So there's this sense of familiarity and homecoming that she is thoroughly lacking in real life, that she can still find in the game. And there's like, all of them have these elements of trying to figure out themselves, trying to find a place to call home, trying to just be who they can be without the constraints of the world as it is.
You're really making me want to play a role-playing game now.
It's so much fun. You should. It's my favorite thing, like aside from writing, and it's basically just still writing a story, only with more people. Yeah, no, role-playing is the best.
I think one of the things I love that you talked about there is how these characters can take lessons from this fictionalized world they've created, and that makes a lot of sense, because one of the things I really loved about these 5 characters is that they're smart. They're horror movie smart. I watch a lot of horror movies and read a fair amount of thrillers, and I love that these 5 don't really fall for most of your typical horror movie traps. They don't run upstairs when the killer's in the house and things like that make you want to scream at the TV or at the book. There were a few moments when characters make instinctual choices, and I just knew as a reader that they were being tricked. How did you decide when to have your characters fall directly into the killer's plans, and when to have them evade and outsmart whoever or whatever is behind all this?
That was honestly so tricky, because I am definitely that person who spends a lot of time screaming at the TV, going like, why would you do that? It's obviously a trap. And there were definitely moments here too where I just wanted to give them all like the easy way out. But then I realized, like, I, as the writer, like sometimes it almost felt like creating this kind of elaborate RPG setup for my characters. But I, as a writer, know exactly what's going on. They don't. So while they can reason their way out of like more obvious traps, and there's definitely this sense of we've played multiple murder mysteries before, so we've actually learned a bit from that. There's also still the sense of they're teens in an incredibly scary environment, in an incredibly scary situation, and they're worried about themselves, they're worried about their friends. You're just not going to make the best decisions in that case. Like, fight or flight is definitely a thing that happens, and no matter how much you want to reason through that, that's only something you can do afterwards when you found a sense of like safety and stability. So I wanted to respect that, and I wanted to not rationalize everything too much, because that felt as unrealistic as just walking into every trap ever. So it was very much a sense of occasionally taking a step back and considering what information the various characters had and why they would do things. Like, at some point, one of the characters does make a really bad decision, but does so to try to help a friend because they care about that friend. So there's this sense of trying to figure out what does their world look like right now, what matters to them, and what is the most logical step forward. And sometimes they're not the best, but I have been 18, and teens do not make the best decisions all the time, which is what makes them so great.
That's so true. They really feel like real people in the choices they make, and also their relationships to each other. And this book is really, as much as it is about the plot and the whodunit and the fear, it's also really about the relationships between these characters and the relationships that they have with each other and with themselves and with other people who matter to them who are outside of this role-playing group. And it's about the bonds that we all break and the ones that we choose not to prioritize as well. how did you craft each of their personal perspectives on, you know, chosen family over family of origin, loyalty and trust, you know, choosing yourself over others, or vice versa?
Honestly, character cards and having large, like, you can't see it on purpose right now, but there's an incredible whiteboard like right next to me. Basically, there's a cabinet here that I painted in whiteboard paint entirely. And I would show you, except there's stuff on there that I can't show you, so I won't. But it's basically just my staring at the various characters and drawing lines and arrows and trying to figure out like a good balance between who they all are, how they've like diverged over time. They've been together for the best part of 3 years when the book starts, and it's the type of friendship that changes because they all grow up and because they all make different changes in their lives. Some of those changes affect the others, some of them don't. Some of them irrevocably shift who they are and what they prioritize. But there was just a sense of, I wanted to have it all drawn out. I wanted to have all the different relationships between the characters on flashcards and on the whiteboard, and to have to make sure that I knew how their relationships informed and pushed the story forward, moved it forward. Because like you said, it's a thriller and it's a cabin in the woods story, but it's also very much a story about friendships and how friendship changes, and how even if we don't want it to change, the choices we make, the secrets we keep from each other, and like you said, sometimes not prioritizing people for whatever reason, does change those relationships as well. And that's something that just as a writer, as a reader, really appeals to me. I am infinitely interested and curious about people and how they people, because humans are fascinating. And I know saying that makes me sound like an alien, but it's true. It's one of the things that just appeals to me most about writing for young adults, is that sense of growing up and changing who you are, how you look at the world, how that influences the people around you. I think there are endless stories to be told about that, and this is one that I wanted to tell.
I love that. I definitely agree. People are very interesting. You can take a group of people who have known each other or don't know each other and throw them into this kind of forced setting in the cabin in the woods. And you did it here with, you know, characters who know each other, but other thrillers and other horror movies have done it with characters who don't know each other. And you always get something different every time because people don't do what you expect them to do.
Yeah, basically, yes.
I'm curious if you've ever read anything, and it could be fiction or it could be craft advice, that has really made you think differently about thrillers and mysteries.
I've read a lot of good thrillers, which generally helps. I will say, obviously, Karen McManus's books are amazing and like edge of your seat type thrillers, and reading books like that really helps me get a sense of what do I want my book to be. Not necessarily in terms of do I want it to be the same, but more how do I want to interact with the context of thrillers, of this like literary genre around the book I'm writing. So reading a lot generally helps me the most, and there's so many good thriller writers in YA. Stephanie Kuhn is honestly like a scary mastermind, and I appreciate her a lot. Like Charmin Strange was amazing. Oh god, I'm completely blanking on the title now, which is great. Let me just glance at my bookshelves and see if I can find it real quick. Probably not. Oh, When I'm Through With You was also a fantastic book and a must read. And it's honestly, for me, it's mostly that it's reading amazing writers doing what they do best. That's what inspires me the most, both as a reader and a writer. It makes me want to be a better author, be a better creator. So I do read craft books too on occasion. I love it. It's fun to sharpen the tools you use. And I mean that in a pen and keyboard manner, not in a stabby thing manner. But mainly I love writing, like reading good books. That's the best thing there is.
I definitely couldn't agree with that more. It's very, I wouldn't say relaxing, because reading a book like Even If We Break is not necessarily relaxing, but it takes you out of your own life in a way that's very soothing and interesting and fun. I'm curious
Absolutely.
if there were any scenes that didn't make it into the final book that you wish did, that maybe you drafted or imagined drafting that just didn't make it into the final product.
There are two scenes that I love a lot that we're now actually using. I wrote them as short stories for the pre-order giveaway. So I'm glad that we're still using them, but they're both like prequel scenes to the book. And one of them explores the group at cons a lot more, at WyvernCon, where they go to. And I love cons. I miss Comic Cons. I can't imagine going to a Comic Con anytime soon because the thought of so many people in one space terrifies me. But I miss the general vibe of Comic Cons. I miss like hanging out in artist alleys and just finding new books to read and finding new artists to like fan be over. And there's definitely more of that in that particular short story that I wanted to explore in the book as well. But like at some point it just detracts from the fact that they're in a cabin and people are disappearing / getting murdered. So, you know, for all that cons are great, there's a time and a place for them. So I'm glad we did find a time and a place for them. So there's definitely that scene. And the other short story is not something I thought of before, but had like in the back of my mind for one of the characters. And that's Finn, one of the characters, isn't actually a big part of the group when they start off Even If We Break, because he's been badly hurt by some of the group members and he isn't in the right mindset to interact with them, to game with them, to just like pretend everything is okay. And one of the short stories sort of explores things he does while the rest of the people, the rest of the group is gaming. And that was a lot of fun too, because I knew writing the book and plotting the book that those scenes had happened, but they wouldn't fit in the story themselves. So it was really fun to sort of explore that and go into the stories a bit deeper for the pre-order campaign.
I love that, and I think that's one of the best things about a pre-order campaign is being able to give your readers something behind the scenes or a little bit extra deeper, like you said, that they didn't get when they were reading the book. Sometimes it's a novella or a short story, sometimes it's character art, but it's always something that takes you deeper. And
yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, also character art, like commissioning character art, is not something I've done before this book, but I've done it for the pre-order campaign and then also for one of the Creative for Comics auction. Wow, my brain. So it was a lot of fun seeing characters come to life, like characters that previously existed only in my brain, and seeing them come to life and seeing them like different interpretations of artists on characters. So that's definitely something I'll be doing more, because it's art is magic. I don't understand how people art, but it's so cool to see.
I know, I love that too. It's really fun to be able to see how artists imagine a character that I'm also imagining, you know, a lot of the times at the same time or before I see the art. I like something that you said about the pre-order campaign having, you know, some backstory about what Finn was doing when the group was together. And I think something that makes Even If We Break so dynamic is that the characters, a lot of them have strong relationships, you know, to other characters outside of these five. You know, they have other relationships that matter to them, like Zach, Damien, and Elle, and others. How do you think that those external relationships factor into these characters' choices that they make during the course of the book? You know, they're ultimately pushed forward by the plot, but also by those relationships with people who aren't even physically here or in danger at the time.
I mean, they definitely factor into some of the decisions that would be quite spoilerish for me to go into detail. So let's not do that. Let me not just give the book away here, because I think my publisher wouldn't appreciate that. I'm fairly good with keeping secrets, but occasionally I'll just like, I'm tempted to blurt stuff out, and then I realize, oh wait, I probably shouldn't do that. But I think one of the things that I loved particularly was having those characters around the group and having them sort of circling around and sometimes influencing decisions they made, but also influencing who they are as people and who they're becoming. Because like I said, the book is very much about friendship and how friendship changes, especially once people start to grow up and drift apart and make different choices. And an important element of that is also the other people they meet. Like this maybe started off as a kind of like friendship of convenience because they all played the game and then came together and spent a lot of time together and were a fantastic group for a time. But growing up and finding your own way is also about finding the people you want and need in your life. And one of the ways in which I really enjoyed exploring that was creating the character of Damien for Ever and Finn specifically, because they both have very similar wants and desires from they both want to design games, so in very different ways. But they're also both trying to figure out who they are. Like Ever is non-binary, Finn is trans, and that influences them because it does. Like who we are and how we identify is a part of us. So I really wanted to give them another trans character who could serve as a sort of, not even necessarily a mentor, but this elder person, this trans person he's in his late 20s and he's seen more of the world. He's more confident in who he is. He's seen the good and the bad. And to me, as like a queer person, but also as a non-binary person, it's been a massive part of my own journey is finding people who have taken those steps before me, who can tell me like, this is what it means. Don't worry about this. People are going to hate you. It's fine. Make sure you find the people who don't. Like, make sure you find the people who can support you, who can lift you up. And I wanted to have an element of that in this book too. And Damien is very much that for both Ever and Finn in different ways. And then also for Finn in even different ways because he is a wheelchair user and Finn is physically disabled, uses crutches, and is at this sort of crossroads where the way his body is functioning, it might mean he also will become a wheelchair user. And he's struggling with that. And Damien is also this calming presence there who can tell him, hey, wheels are awesome. don't worry about it, we've got this. And it was just very important to me to have this grown-up presence, someone who has seen it, has lived it, and who can reach out to them, to like a next generation, and help them climb up that ladder. And it was also important for me, for readers to see that, because it's a struggle figuring out who you are. And it's really helpful to know that people have done it before you, and likely people will do it after you, and we're all part of that same journey.
That's so powerful. I got the same feeling from both of their relationships with Damien, that I really think it will be great for readers to see that. I know that when I was a teen, I certainly needed that, and I hope that it shows teen readers now that they can find folks who have been there before them, who have come out or dealt with experiences or careers that they're interested in or life circumstances, and find those people and seek them out and see that there's a way forward for them, no matter what that way is. So I love that you did that through their relationship with Damien. It's a really good key relationship, I think, besides the 5 of them interacting.
Yeah.
I know that you've mentioned a lot how much you love to role play, and it definitely shows in your face and your voice when you talk about it. I'm curious if you have a favorite role-playing game that you play, or a fantasy fictionalized world that you've created that you really love.
Many. In terms of worlds I created, I'm currently game mastering a Star Trek Adventures game. So basically a crew of Star Trek nerds who are exploring space. It's great. We're so chaotic. It's beautiful. But one of the worlds I think of most fondly is I ran a text-based RPG when I was a teen, in this incredibly expansive setting with it had so many rules for a text-based RPG, like character classes and potential dice rolls and ways to sort of gain loot, and it's this whole open world setting, and my players could go anywhere, and I had several dozen of them on any given day. And that's still a world I think of fondly. It was definitely I referenced earlier that this very traditional fantasy type world. This was absolutely the case too, and it went everywhere from political stories and things that happened in the inn and the castle, and it was all so tropey. But also there were so many friendships built there, and so many people who spent literal years there just gallivanting through the world and figuring out games to play and adventures to go on. And I don't think I saved any of it, maybe bits and pieces, but that was a lot of fun to do for a long time. I definitely borrowed some Dungeons and Dragons type rules and all kinds of other systems, and it was great. So in terms of worlds, that one will always be special to me. In terms of games, I still love D&D. I have played it in various different editions. Will continue to do so. But I'm also a big fan of many indie games, different types of games, other publishers. One of the games I love best at the moment is Tales from the Loop, which is by Fria Liga, a Swedish publisher, and it's basically Stranger Things, the RPG. You play kids in the 80s in a town where there's a loop. And weird things happen. It's so much fun. It's so sweet and lovely, and it's a great entry point to RPGs too, I think. So I love that. My Little Pony, the RPG, is also great. So yeah, there's so many. I have an entire cabinet here full of rule books and core books, and I love exploring new RPGs. I can't always find the time for them, so occasionally I just read the core books and imagine what it would be like. But yeah, if I would recommend one right now, it would probably be Tales from the Loop.
It sounds like there's so many out there that you could almost do an entire subcategory of books based on RPGs.
Oh yeah, easily. So I actually have included references to RPGs in pretty much all of my books so far. Will likely continue to do so. So I think I'm just going to try to get as many references to different games in as possible and see who notices.
I love that. I think it really shows the reader a little bit of who you are off the page, because I think, you know, books are so much about the characters and the story, and every once in a while I think the author peeks through in a way, and it might be through something a character says or does or believes, or might be through something like that, role-playing being such a key part of the setting, or even just a drop-in line in your other books. It's something that shows the readers a little bit more of who you are and where you're coming from. And you wrote, even if we break, with such an authenticity, like you really knew what you were doing. You really knew how game masters work, and you really knew the importance of detailed costuming and scene setting and consistent characters. And I just love that. I thought it was so authentic and fun.
Thank you.
I'm curious to kind of wrap things up, and I always like to ask authors this because I think our viewers, everybody who's watching this wants to know too, if somebody picks up Even If We Break and they love it, what other books, especially other thrillers, but other books too in general that are already released or coming out, would you recommend?
I would recommend, on the thriller side of things, I definitely recommend Stephanie Kuhn's When I'm Through With You, which is also, like I said, it's a terrifying book. But it's also in this wilderness setting, and you have no idea what exactly happens. And she just writes really great psychological thrillers, and I love figuring out how people's minds work, like how writers' minds work when they create books like that. I know how I do it, but I'd love to hear from her at some point how she does it. So I would recommend that one. Let me just glance at my bookshelves. I would recommend Felix Ever After for no other reason than that book is absolutely amazing and you should read it. It has nothing at all to do with Even If We Break, but I've been telling people about it for the better part of like half a year now, and it's great. You should read it. Also holds true for Elazzo by Darcy Little Badger. Again, nothing at all to do with Even If We Break, but read it. So there's that. I would recommend, oh my goodness, on the like RPG geeky side, I'd recommend Sam Max's Conquest, which is a middle grade book about a conquest. So a quest during a con, and it's so much fun. It's so sweet, and I love it so much. She completely gets that con feeling, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's such a happy making book. Obviously also Ash Poston's Geekerella series, which is great. It's a lot happier than Even If We Break, but given the times we're in, happy books are very necessary. So those, oh god, recommendations are so hard, mainly because I immediately drift off topic and recommend other books because I'm that person. Yeah, I shouldn't look at my bookshelves because now I'm like, you should also read You Should See Me in a Crown, which again has nothing at all to do with Even If We Break, but it's amazing. And happy books are important. So let me just stop there before I recommend even more random books.
I think the ones you recommended are fine. Our readers, they love a wide variety of things, and I think, I can speak for a lot of people in saying I love a good thriller. I love to be kind of scared out of my mind and rooting for characters and turning the pages, but there is something really satisfying about turning the pages and knowing that nobody's likely to die throughout the course of the book.
It's like people don't necessarily expect it from me, but I also enjoy that. I quite like books where there's just a happily ever after and no one dies. But yeah, I don't know. I love reading all sorts of books. It's especially when I'm writing a thriller-esque book, I tend to gravitate more towards either things like fantasy or like romance, or books that make me feel like there's joy and rainbows in the world and not just scary murders in cabins.
Do you think that you would ever branch out? I know that you've written a couple of books that are in a similar vein to Even If We Break, and then you've also written a graphic novel. Do you ever have any plans to venture into, happy-go-lucky romance, or just, like you explained, a happy book, whether it has a romance or not?
I would love to do a happy book. I think it's likely that something happier will happen at some point. I'm not sure if I'm necessarily the right writer for a romance, mainly because I'm so ace. I'm so ace.
I love that.
I'm not sure if that works. But yeah, no, I think this year, if it's taught me anything, it's been like pursue the stories that I'm excited about and pursue stories that bring me joy. And occasionally that's super creepy murder type stories, but occasionally that's also stories about better things and better worlds and joy. So I think you can expect something a little more happy at some point too.
Love that. I'll definitely be keeping my eyes open for your next works and for that eventual happy book. I think you could definitely do something really magical with it because, definitely no spoilers on Even If We Break, but I just feel like the characters were treated with so much care, considering that they're in a thriller setting. It was obvious that you cared about these characters, and that if they were in a non-murder mystery setting, you would have set them up with realistic challenges, but in a very caring and loving way. So I love that. And yeah, thank you very much for being here with us at We Need Diverse Books. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of it. I absolutely loved reading this book over the summer, and I've been recommending it to all of my friends. I already made my wife read it so that we could talk about it. So it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today, and thank you for everything.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a joy sharing this book with you and also sharing my launch with We Need Diverse Books, because it's still very important and still such a part of my heart and writing life. So it's been an absolute pleasure.